January through March is really trade show season. We averaged 5 days a week together. I spent more time with Mike than I probably did Michelle, so we got to know each other pretty well. And as we went along, we were at the National Trade Show in 2013, and I'm not really sure how we got on the topic, but the idea came up was like, wouldn't it be really cool if we could start our own model train company? And it was like, yeah, that's crazy. I mean, how would we ever get it off the ground? Why would we ever do that? Work for a great company. But it was that seed that got germinated. And that seed started to grow. And throughout the fall of 13, I started working on a business plan. And as we started working on that business plan, it made a lot of sense, but there were some pretty big hurdles. One is, where would we ever come up with the money to be able to do this? But some of the reasons why was it's our chance to chart our own course. And make all those final decisions. There were projects that we always wanted to do at Athearn that we could never get off the ground. And it was like, boy, we'd love to do a Genesis Level 40-2. We'd love to do a big blow turbine, and some other things. We could never get the traction to do those. And so as we started really getting into it, I challenged Mike. I said, Mike, you got a boxcar somewhere?
Yeah, I'll have the t-shirts.
So I challenged Mike, sorry. There'll be one on the table. I forgot to get it out. I said, if we're going to leave a company where we could retire from comfortably, who's taking great care of us, let's not just be another Me Too model railroad company. Let's push our industry to new heights. And so I challenged Mike and said, let's do some innovation. So how many people in the room have built a blue box kit? I'm going to just about everybody. Yeah. And so you built that blue box kit, you put it back in its original box, and you brought it to the club, and the couplers fell off. Has it happened to you? I'm sure it has. You haven't seen a lot of heads nodding. So I said, well, in our kit line, what if we designed a package that when you built the car, you can actually stick it back in the package and it safely holds it? It's like, why hasn't anybody ever thought of that before? So that was one of the little innovations. And then, on the far end of the scale, our first project was the big blow turbine. And for its time, the technology was pretty amazing. Things like class lights that you could cycle between red, white, green, and off. You had interior lighting in the cab. The control stands illuminated, and the gauges are even printed inside. You've got a night light on the engineer side. You've got a ground light. You've got a night light on the back of the locomotive. The doors open on the A unit. In the B unit, you've got opening doors so you can see the turbine inside. The turbine fan blade even spins. And then it has features where, as the locomotive is going through a curve, you hear a curve squeal sound. As it goes across a switch, you hear a frog clank sound. So really pushing that into the innovation. And we'll share a couple of other things that we were working on too from the innovative side. Another was branding. We have 4 brands. We have Kit Classics, Operator, Rivet Counter, Museum Quality. And for us as a manufacturer, the big expense comes from tooling. And the more detail you add to tooling, the more cost. So one of the ideas I came to Mike with was, what if we could share tooling between brands? And that's where we came up with the idea of sharing tooling between Operator, Rivet Counter, Museum Quality cost. So it allows us to grow that line pretty quickly. And then, of course, it's a chance to live the American dream. Hopefully it doesn't become the American nightmare, and I can tell you it's turned out pretty good. And then the last thing, one of the other big things too, Mike, when we first started talking about scale trains, his faith was a lot stronger than mine at the time. And he kept telling me, Shane, God's brought us together for a much higher purpose than to make model trains. And I struggled to understand that, but today I really get it. We're really blessed to be able to give back to our local communities every month in both time and resources. We don't really talk a lot about that, but we'll share a couple of bigger things that have been public. And as we worked on that plan, we realized that we needed more help. And so, Mike could do the product development end of the business. I could do the business end, the sales, the marketing. But you got to have a guy who's really good at putting on the logos and the heralds and all those things, the lettering in the right place, picking the right colors. And that's when we decided to approach Joe Olvera. And Joe at the time was the art director at Athearn. And so you've ever been to Train Fest in Milwaukee? It's one of our big shows we do. See a hand in the room. Yeah, so that's every November. It's one of the big 3, kind of the 3 crown jewels. And Joe actually worked for Athearn in Southern California. And so Joe and Mike are going to come out from California. I'm going to drive up from Champaign, Illinois. And Joe knows we want to talk to him, but he has no idea why. And so we do the show on Saturday. We go to dinner Saturday night. Joe comes back to the hotel room. And we're going to roll this out to Joe. I think, I'm scared to death. I think Joe's going to look at us and tell us we've lost our minds. And you'll notice, too, that Joe has a very young family at the time. And as we get down and we kind of roll through that hour, I look at Joe at the end and I say, Joe, what do you think? And just like that, Joe says, I'm in. And I'm like, Joe, you should probably talk to your wife. And Joe says, no, I'm in. I'm like, Joe, you really need to talk to Alexis. And he says, no, I'll convince her. And so sure enough, Joe convinced her, and Joe came on board with us, but we were still kind of waffling, right? Worked for a great company, and it was really hard to take that final leap of faith. And we had enough money in the beginning, we could do the Big Blow Turbine project, we could do the tender project, because it kind of is a takeoff of that, the UP water tenders. We could do the operator rivet counter tank car, we could do the box car. But, you know, I liken starting a business to launching off an aircraft carrier. You know, when you launch off, you're burning cash like crazy. And at some point, you got to catch lift, right? That's your cash flow. You got to be able to stand on your own. And I knew we could launch off that carrier, but boy, we were going to crash into the sea because there just wasn't enough behind it to keep us going. Well, you know, I'll go back in time. So when I started with Horizon, I've been there about 23 years, over 23 years actually, when we left. The early days, the company was owned by the Stevens family. And it was purely wholesale back then, and their commitment to retailers was orders in by noon, shipped the same day. And it didn't matter, tongue-tied, I need some water, matter whether it was summertime or Christmas time, that order was going. So like for me, I was in wholesale sales in the early days, and when it was Monday and Tuesday at Christmas, you went out to the warehouse and you picked, packed, and shipped boxes. Who was standing right there beside you? The Stevens family. That's the kind of people they were. And when they decided to retire, they made us an employee-owned company. That was their thank you for all the service we've done over the years. And so this very first day of 2014 at Horizon, there's a meeting, and it's a global meeting. And Horizon was in many, many countries. So, you know, there was Southern California, that's state, of course, and then Central Illinois. But country-wise, we were in Hong Kong, China, Germany, we were in Italy, France, UK, I mean, all over the globe, and had about 700 employees. This meeting is at the exact same time in every one of those places around the globe. Never happened in the 23 years I've been there, so you knew this was a really big deal. Well, as we're in this meeting, we're learning as employee owners that we're being bought out. And suddenly we go from having this much capital to having this much capital. I'm in the meeting texting Mike, I'm like, Mike, this is God telling us it's time to go. And that was the day we made the final decision that, yeah, this is what we're gonna do. So from there, a lot of things had to happen. And, you know, Mike and I mentioned we traveled a lot from January through March. Well, we had to find some time we could actually go to China and visit with the design, find a design team, visit some factories, find a tool maker, all those things. And as we got to look at the calendar there in 2014, there were only 2 weekends in a row that we didn't have a show, and it happened to be right after Chinese New Year. Chinese New Year is when the factory shut down for 2 weeks, and there's a ramp up afterwards, usually takes a couple of weeks, so things are kind of slow. It's a great time to visit. So, you know, so we find these 2 dates, and we decided we're gonna go over and do what we need to do. Anybody ever flown through Champaign, Illinois? Flown into Champaign? Usually a hand in the room. Champaign is a tiny, tiny airport. Like when I was flying out of there, it was 2 gates, they used one, and there was 1 airline, and that was American Airlines. That's how small it was. And so to go to on this trip, I'm gonna fly from Champaign to Chicago, and then over to Hong Kong, and then Mike's gonna fly from Southern California to San Francisco and over to Hong Kong. And we're gonna meet about 30 minutes apart. And of course, at this point, the only people that know what's going on are Mike and Joe and our family. So I get to the airport and preparing for this trip and pretty nervous. I've never been outside the US except to Canada, and that's just USA light. But I've never been overseas, right? Never been to China. You got this impression of what China's gonna be like. It's not like that at all. And so I get to the airport and I'm getting ready for this flight, and I hear a very familiar voice come up to me and it says, "Hey Shane, what are you doing?" And I look up, and it's my Athearn's boss's boss. And I say, well, you know, it's that moment. I go, well, I'm going on vacation. What are you doing? And he looks at me and says, we're going to visit the factories in China. And I'm like, uh-oh. And we start talking a little bit longer. And the #1 guy in RC Aircraft walks up, and he's going to the factory too. And then I learned that out of Chicago on United Airlines, which is Mike's airline, the #2 guy in the entire company, the vice president, is going to China to visit the factories as well. It's like, oh boy, we are in so much trouble. So we start talking a little bit longer, and they finally ask me the big question, right? Where are you going on vacation? And I asked, like, do I tell the story? Do I tell the truth? And I said, well, I've got a great friend that goes to Hong Kong all the time. He says a great time to visit right after Chinese New Year. Christmas decorations are still up, and it's not too crazy, so come on over and I'll show you the city. I said, what do you say? And so they're like, well, that's really cool. Let's tell you about some great places to eat, some sights to see. And so I jot all that down. And time comes, we get on the little airplane, we fly to Chicago. And of of course, then we changed planes, get on the Big Bird. And we got on the Big Bird, we're certainly enough on the same flight. So thankfully I didn't tell a story. And I had 16 hours, that's how long it is from Chicago, to really worry about getting caught. And it was miserable too, because in those days I had no status and I was flying middle seat. It was terrible. But 16 hours, we land in Hong Kong and get off the plane. And I literally go through customs with the Horizon people. We get the baggage claim together. And I turn on my phone and there's a text message from Mike. And he's like, great news, my flight's been delayed 2 hours. I'm like, phew. And so those guys, I wrap up with the Horizon folks. Mike gets there and we go into Hong Kong that night. And the next morning we go into mainland China. And things come together amazingly quick. Have you guys ever heard of a company called Sandakan? You may have heard that name. I see a few heads nodding. Sandakan was a manufacturer that built for just about everybody in the U.S. market at one time. They made for, like when Proto was huge, Proto 2000, they made all the Proto 2000 product. They made for Bachmann, they made for Walthers, they made for Athearn, you name it, they pretty much made for everybody. They closed a couple years before we started our company, and we were able to hire several of their design engineers. So that helped a lot. We found a tool maker pretty quick that's done super detailed locomotives and freight cars, and then we found a factory. So what we thought would take up to a week only took us 4 days, which was amazing. And then Mike says, Shane, we probably ought to take that vacation to Hong Kong. So Mike and I, we go back into Hong Kong, and he's been a great tour guide, right? He's been there for years, done the ferries and the subway and the trains and all that stuff. So he gives me the 7-day tour, 24 hours. It was absolutely amazing. And so it's time to come home, and we get to the Hong Kong airport, kind of look over our shoulders, nobody's there. And on the reverse trip, I'm going to fly Hong Kong to Tokyo Narita to Chicago and home, and Mike's going to fly his reverse route. And I got to Hong Kong, and if you guys have ever worked a swing shift, man, my heart goes out to you. China's exactly 12 hours later, so it's like 7 something in the morning. I had no idea how to flip myself, so I was a mess. I tried to sleep all night, and it just doesn't work. So I decided that I would pay the $50 and go into the American Airlines lounge and kind of relax and type up my notes. So I get into the lounge there at Narita, and as I'm typing my notes, I hear that same familiar voice. Hey Shane, how was your vacation? I'm like, let me show you the photos. And it all worked out, had a great time, and got back to the States. And when we got back to the States, something really cool happened. We found out in China that we had a lot more factory capacity available to us than we originally planned. So we decided to approach Paul Ellis. That's Paul there, second from your right. Second from, this one guy right here. And Paul took some time to second from the left. Yeah, I know. I'm a little confused tonight. He's more wine. Paul there, second from the left. Paul is in my opinion, the best locomotive product developer in our industry. Paul, back in the Athearn days, did the SDP 45, Jeep 38-2, the 40-2, the bay window caboose, ton of projects. With us, he's had his hands just in about every locomotive we've done and some freight cars. And Paul is a huge Southern Pacific model. Big time. Like, if you went out to Paul's garage, you're going to find gyro lights. Yeah, you're going to find number boards. You're going to find doors. I mean, you're going to find everything. To the point where Paul, when we were working on the 40-2, the factory couldn't figure out how to do the engineering on the knuckle buster latch on the doors. So he just went out to the garage, got a latch, and sent it to the factory. That's how serious Paul is about the SP. And Paul, he wasn't like Joe, where it's like, yeah, I'm in. Paul took a little time to think about it, but Paul had a burning question. And his burning question to me was, he's like, Shane, I've always wanted to do the ultimate SD40T-2 tunnel motor where you can't see the drivetrain and it pulls well and has all the lighting functions. And he says, if I decide to come on board with Scale Trains, can I do that? And I looked at him and I said, Paul, is that what it's going to take? And he said, yes. And I looked at Paul immediately and I said, yes. And that's how we ended up doing a tunnel motor. So from there, we had a lot to get done. And we had about 6 weeks before we were going to leave. And I challenged the guys with 2 big things. I said, guys, number one, we leave with our integrity. Not one photo, not one drawing, nothing gets copied, absolutely nothing walks out of the building at Athearn. And so we had to start from scratch. This is just a sampling of our library. We have over 1,000 books at this point. We have cases of builder's drawings and paint lettering diagrams and research materials. We have a server that has over 750,000 digital images on it, and we're always on the hunt for more. And kind of give you an idea, it never fails, right? When we're working on a project, there's a detail that you need a photo of, and you get it into this project. And unlike, when we're, as a modeler, when you're working on something, unless you're doing a contest, your timeline is pretty infinite, right? You can just work on it as time allows. but we have 5 years worth of planning now. So we have slots for things we want to get done over the next 5 years. So you got to give an answer. And if you don't have that photo or that piece of documentation, you're going to make your best educated guess. Of course, the day you announce, somebody goes, here's a picture, but, so we're always on the hunt. So if you have a slide collector you always want to digitize, we'll do that for you for free. All we ask is we keep a digital copy. We'll give you originals back and a digital copy as well. We won't share that without your permission. And if you'd like to have those, see Michelle or I afterwards, we'll get your contact info. And because we're always on the hunt, in the early days, we bought a lot of slides on eBay. In those early days, it was crazy because I was getting some $100 slide deals, like for one slide. And finally, I went to Mike and I'm like, Mike, we got to stop spending $100 on slides. Why are we spending so much? And after doing a little research, we found out that Paul and Mike were bidding against each other on the same slide. So yeah, then our slide costs went way down. And then the second thing that happened, I told the guys, I said, Athearn and Horizon have been great to us. This is a company we could retire from. They're going to lose 4 key people. We just can't walk out the door and leave them. And so over that 6-week period, at that time I was doing the production planning, so I got us out some extra time at Athearn. Mike and Paul wrapped up some new tooling projects, so Athearn would have new tooling in the pipeline. And also Joe worked with the art team to get the art team out a few extra months. So it was up to them if they wanted to follow the plan, but at least we left them with a plan that they could carry forward with. And then we left on May the 2nd. On Monday, May the 5th, man, I'm telling you what, it was absolutely game on. How many of you guys would love to place a pre-order from a company you've never heard of that's promising you the best product ever with all these really cool features, and all they're showing you is a prototype photo? Yeah, us either. So one of the commitments that we had from the very beginning was when we make a new product announcement for an all-new product, you're going to see it, touch it, hold it, hear it, so you know that it's not vaporware. And so, to give you an idea of timelines, normally for a locomotive, from the time we say yes and we start the research in earnest to the time it delivers is 3 years. For a freight car, we're looking at about 18 to 24 months. So out of the gate, we're going to do the big blow turbine, which is essentially 2 complicated locomotives. The tender's a complicated freight car. We're going to do the water tenders as well. We're going to do the tank cars in 2 brands, which is complicated, and then the box car is fairly straightforward. But we're going to take 3 years of product development, and we're going to shrink that into 18 months. So when we make the announcement, we have all that product to show. Pretty big challenge. So right away, we were making arrangements to go to Union, Illinois, which is the top left corner. That's where Big Blow 18 was, or is. And we were there within 2 weeks of leaving. And the very next week, we went to Ogden, Utah. Union has the 24-seat tender. That's the longer welded tender. They have the shorter 23-seat tender at Ogden, and it's riveted, so we need to make sure we got all those details right. Plus, it gave us a chance to compare both the locomotives. And then that summer of 2014, our family, Michelle and I, that's our son, we took a family vacation to Yellowstone, and we stopped in Cheyenne, and we documented the water tenders. And so we'll give you an idea of what it looks like from the research phase. And Michelle will just pop over to a video. So on the table here, this is for the turbine project, but this is going to work the same for everything that we do. On the table is every book that we can find. You'll see some hard drives there, so all the digital images, anything we can find on the internet. You name the research material, we're going to do everything we can to find it. And we'll sit down and we'll compare notes and we'll look at things. And then this is the actual turbine drawing. This drawing is 15 feet long. It's going to give you the truck centers, length, width, height, the major dimensions. When we went out to those 2 museums, and to Cheyenne, we actually shot over 5,000 images so we could make sure we got all the small details. And then in a moment, you're going to see something I like to call the Holy Grail. This is a spreadsheet. And it works the same way for the turbine or any other project, so the concept's all the same. And what you're going to see on this spreadsheet are columns, and every column is a detail. So for instance, on a turbine, this is a dynamic brake and it's shaped like an H, so this is an HH dynamic. You can have an HI on an A unit. On a B unit, you can have an HI, you can have an II version, and you'll list all that by road number. You'll have things like horn type, horn location, for the turbines, whether they had grab irons on the nose or not, and what kind of antenna it used, whether it's little things, even like there's little vents right here. Some of them had them, some of them didn't, and so every one of those features is a column. And what you'll do, the turbines were pretty straightforward. They were delivered in the late 50s. They were gone by 1970, and they were in 2 batches. So there's batches 1 through 7, which would all have the same features, and batches 8 through 30. And all you do is, as delivered, here's what they look like. And every single column gets ticked off, 8 through 30, tick it off. But then what you do is you got to go back and you got to look at it again, because by the mid-60s, the turbines changed pretty dramatically. Some of the things that they did is they took the horns and moved them from the cab to the end of the long car body. They added louvers here. They added these extensions to the fuel tank. They made some other changes as well, and you want to make sure you capture all of that. And then we're going to look at it one more time right before the end of their life. So how did they look when they went to the museums? And that way you can do them later in life as well. Now, for the turbine, it's complicated, but it's not crazy, right? Let's talk about Burlington Northern. And if you're a BN fan, I'm not an expert, but you can help me out through this. I do know that BN was the biggest buyer of SD40-2s, and they had over 12 orders. And we're talking about 40-2 for a minute. And if you can imagine, they first took delivery in the early 70s, and what you're gonna do then is you're gonna say, okay, here's order number 1, and all those features. Order number 2, order number 3, go all the way through it. That spreadsheet, by the way, today, I couldn't even stretch my arms wider than all the detail features. Things like dynamic brakes. We tooled over 10 different dynamic brake hatches for the SD40-2. There's different types of cabs. There's welded, there's riveted armrests, different sun-shaped tracks. You've got different control stands inside. I could go on and on about all the different things you look at. And when you look at BN then, so they delivered, let's say, in the early 70s. Well, then you're going to take another look at it in late 70s, early 80s, right? So that's the second time. And then about the time, just before the BNSF merger, so late 90s, somewhere in that neighborhood. So the third time, and then, let's see, got myself confused. Early 70s, then you're going to look at it in the late 70s, late 80s, early 90s. And then you're going to look at it right after the BNSF merger. Then you're going to go another 10 years, and then you're going to look at it today. That's at least 6 times that you're going to look at all 12 orders. And it never fails as you get deeper and deeper into it. You're going to find a feature that you didn't notice on the others, so you got to go back and start over, add a column, and go back and double check all that. That happens many times. And then you'll do that for every railroad. You do that for, pick the railroad, L&N and UP and whoever else took 40-2s as delivered, and then you follow it throughout its entire life. The reason I bring up the 40-2, we hear a lot that, man, you guys haven't done a lot of variety yet in the 40-2. When we started, and we, product development's wanting to add features, add details so they can do all these railroads. When you do that, you add cost. Me as the business guy, I'm like, man, we gotta stop adding, we gotta start making some money. So we came up with 8 runs, and that's where we're at now, and we've maxed out the 40-2. So 2 years ago, we started the research phase in earnest. About a year ago, we started the tooling phase, the design phase, and now we're in tooling. We're literally gonna be able to do 40-2s and not repeat the same road name, paint scheme, or era every 6 months for the next 20 years when this project gets done. That's how much variety there is if we want to. And to even take that a step further, I believe this will be the most expensive HO locomotive ever done. When you take the first group of tooling, add it to the second group, plus the research and the decoration tooling, we'll have over $750,000 invested in the SD40-2 project. And that's how serious we take it. That's how much we try to get as close to perfect as we can. We'll never be perfect, but we're going to strive for it. So that's what the spreadsheet. I mentioned that we're always out looking for photography. Mike's going to make a little cameo here in a minute, the bottom right. About once a month, he'll go out to the desert in Southern California and shoot. You never know when you're going to catch that one unique paint scheme or that one photo that you need of a detail. Could be a freight car, whatever it might be. And while we're out on the road, although I haven't got to do nearly as much of this trip, we try to get out and shoot as much as we can too, because different places have you see different things. Once we finish the research package, it's on to design. This is our actual design team in mainland China. We have 6 time design engineers, plus this is Benny, he leads the team. And he's gonna pull up the Jibo here. Every color you see on that locomotive is a separate part. Every one of those parts is hand assembled, hand applied. This is the inside of the locomotive. We do that so we do a cutaway, we can see how the gears are gonna work together, what kind of radius is it gonna be. And I talked about those innovations. In the center is the motor, that big kind of gray square there. A few things about the motor. When we started, we actually had our motors custom designed for us from the ground up. So the number of winds, number of turns, the gauge of the wire, the way it's balanced, the armature, everything, so that we can get the maximum torque out of the motor for pulling power, and we can also get the smooth, slow, motor control out of it. And you'll notice too that the motor sits down in the fuel tank, lowers the center of gravity, plus it allows us to put more weight on top of the motor, once again giving you more pulling power. And then another really big innovation is right here in the drivetrain. You'll notice that the drive shaft is almost perfectly straight. Well, what that's doing then is there's no loss of energy as it goes out to the gear towers. Other manufacturers are going to be at an angle, and when it's angled, there's some loss of energy, which means you're losing some pulling power in the locomotive. And you'll see other things too. You'll see the speakers there, the dynamic brakes in the far left corner, the cab. One of the things we do now is we engineer all of our models. So all you have to do is take the coupler screws out, pull out the couplers, take the body off. There's no wires between the two to make it easy to work on. Once we finish the design phase, then it's on to tooling. This is a CNC machine. We're going to cut hardened steel. Some manufacturers use aluminum. Aluminum's a lot less expensive to do, but because of when the mold's opening and closing, it generates heat. Over time, that mold's going to deteriorate. With steel, it's going to outlive us for its ability to run, to make production runs. Hang on one second. So from there, we then we work on copper electrodes. So there's a little bit different process. We can CNC down to N scale, but there's a couple of challenges. One are square corners, and two are the minute details. So this is the SD45 project. It took 7,000 copper electrodes for the tooling on the 45. There's about 5,000 right here sitting on the floor. And what's going to happen then, there's a machine here, and you'll see that's going up and down. Here's the copper electrode, here's the steel tool. As it goes up and down, what it's doing is there's an electric current passing through the copper electrode, burning the design actually into the steel. If you look at like the tender on the turbine when we get done, there's dimples inside the ladders, which are rivets. It takes 3 copper electrodes to make 1 rivet detail on the inside of that ladder. That's why it takes so many copper electrodes to get all that small detail. This is an actual tool. This is a truck, positive and negative side. That's what's going to go into the molded base itself, which you'll see in a second. Bottom right corner, this is die-cast tooling, works the exact same way. And then this is the mold base, so that's what the molds will go into, and then go into the molding machine. And we'll see that process here in just a minute.
They're pretty big size.
Oh yeah, they have a huge crane that carries, it takes, we'll see the molding machine a little bit later, but like setup to a mold machine takes 4 hours just to bring the tool in, hang it in the molding machine, set it up and get it to run. It's about 4 hours. So another thing that had to happen during that 18 months, in California, they don't enforce non-compete agreements, but they do in Illinois. So my non-compete said that we had to move 150 miles and couldn't do business for 18 months. So Michelle and I had always wanted to retire in the mountains of North Carolina, Georgia, Tennessee. And we found a place in Tennessee. It was perfect for us. It's pretty rural. And this will become important in a minute. See that little blue spot, that blue building? This was actually shot from our house. That's our farm ground there on the left-hand side. And when we moved in, I told Michelle, and she's like, the very day after we moved in, that blue building went for sale. And she's like, Shane, you need to go look at that. And I'm like, no, we got this farm ground, we're not farmers, so let's get some bids on what it would cost to build a building. Of course, my thought process is, look, if the business doesn't make it, I get an awesome training room out of the deal. And so that winter, we went out and we got the bids, and it was way more than we could afford. So I hung my head low in the spring, and I said, you're right, I'll go look at that building. And actually, yeah, I did. I did a good chuckle right there. So your husband does the same thing. And so we go look at the blue building, and sure enough, it was right for us. And we bought the building, and it's about 2,700 square feet, totally gutted it. The only thing that's original is the structural steel and the concrete. And another thing that had happened in that top left corner, you'll see that big open door in the loading dock. The land on the side of the loading dock had been for sale since the late 80s. And the guy that had it for sale had wanted this crazy price for it because it's on a main highway. And I talked to him over the course of several months, and finally one time he walks up to me and says, Shane, I like what you guys are doing. I think you're going to be successful. I'll sell you the land at market price. And so we bought the land at market price, ended up on about 7 acres. So it all worked out really well. So the other thing that was going on too is Barry Silverthorne from Trainmasters TV, that's buried in the top right there. He created a 3-part documentary called Scale Trains Big Dreams. It's about a 2-hour documentary, and it's how we got started. Now it's a lot of Hollywood magic, right? It was supposed to look like 2 years or 18 months. It was only about 10 days we shot everything. But Barry, he came down to do the video 3 weeks before we announced the company. And he came down from Canada, that's where he's based from, and at the same time, Mike Joel came from California. Matt from ESU came down from Pennsylvania. We had a ton of other special guests. And so what we're gonna do is we're gonna shoot the scenes on Wednesday and Thursday in the US, and then on Friday, we're gonna get on the airplane, go to China or Hong Kong, and go into the factory, and we're gonna shoot what looks like 2 trips, because we can only afford to send it one time, but with a little Hollywood magic and a change of clothes. It was miserable, by the way, they wore the same clothes for days. But we worked it all out. So Barry comes down, and on that Wednesday, we're shooting video, and he's like, Shane, we need some drama, something to keep people engaged in this video. And I'm like, man, I'm a trainer. You don't get much more boring than me. I don't know where we're going to go with drama. Well, the factory solved that. So Thursday morning, I get a phone call from the factory. And if you get a call in the morning, keep in mind that's nighttime, their time. Well, they don't like to talk to you that way. They want to go to bed. And so they only call you if there's a problem. They want to talk to you when it's nighttime, your time. So I answer the phone. It's our project manager, Andy. And Andy's like, Shane, we have a problem. I kind of expected that. And he says, well, you know, the show is 3 weeks away, and we're almost done with the turbines. We molded the 8 bodies, our 8 different mold numbers. We've done sub-assembly, we've done paint, we've done print, and we're in final assembly. And we realized that 7 of the 8 bodies that we've done are wrong. And there's no way we can get them fixed before the show. And essentially what happened is, all of our molds, whenever we can, we core the holes in the mold. So that way when we're doing grab irons, the holes are perfectly straight, so there's no drilling or anything like that where you can be off. And this is wrong. They've done all of them with without the nose grabs, and because of the complex curves, there's no real way to drill that. There's a couple other little features in the body that were incorrect too. So I tell Andy, I'm like, well, you know, the guys are here from California. Let me visit with them, and we'll call you back in a few minutes. So Barry and the guys show up at our house, and Barry walks in the door, and I'm like, grab your camera, I've got some drama. And he catches their reactions live. It's kind of cool. And we talk about what's going on, and we come up with the solutions. We call Andy back, and the solution is, Joe's a wizard at Photoshop. The factory's gonna do one body painted in the base color, put the grabs on, and then we're gonna Photoshop that. I'm really disappointed. We wanted to have all 8, thought that'd be a lot more impressive. But, you know, sometimes you gotta play the hand you're dealt. So we figure that out on Thursday, finish up shooting. Friday, we get on the airplane, we go to Hong Kong. Sunday morning, we go into the factory. And while we're there, we're supposed to take one of everything home. So we're gonna get a late UP water tender set. We're gonna get both the operator and rivet counter tank cars. And we're also gonna take the turbine home. Plus, there's 300 Chicago Northwestern box cars that are being air freighted for the Train Fest show, so they can sell those. And we have 300 box cars that we're gonna give away. And so, you know, we're getting this factory tour, and you would expect to see your product somewhere throughout the factory. And we're getting this tour, and I keep leaning over to Mike, and I'm like, Mike, where's our stuff? Mike, where's our stuff? Finally, at the end of the tour, I essentially asked the factory owner, where's our stuff? He's a really great guy. He's got this deep voice. He looks at me and goes, Shane, we have a meeting tomorrow. So Monday morning, we come into the office, and this was trial by fire to Chinese culture. I'm telling you what, it was crazy. Walk into this room, and there's about 15 Chinese folks around the table. The only people who speak English are Barry, Mike, and I, the factory owner, and the project manager. And man, you think I talk with my hands? You ought to see these guys. They land airplanes for a living. And there's no such thing as personal space. They're about this close to each other. And when people get animated, they stand up, and they're nose to nose, and their hands are flailing, and the volumes are loud. I'm kind of like hiding behind the table like Barry is back there. I thought somebody was going to die at that time, but that's just their culture. And at about the end of 3 hours, about lunchtime, the factory owner looks at me and says, Shane, you take everything home this week. And I'm like, holy smokes, how are you going to do that? Well, what they did is that afternoon, they molded new bodies for the turbines. So they molded all 7 bodies, and then a couple of extras in case any problems happen. And then Tuesday morning, they went into sub-assembly. Tuesday afternoon, they went into paint. Wednesday morning, they went into print. And by Wednesday afternoon, they were in final assembly. They ran 24/7 all the way to Saturday morning to finish up all the deco samples. And then they also finished up the box cars, and they shipped those on Friday by air freight. So with less than 2 weeks to our 4 families, we had 35 family members from across the country come in to celebrate with us as we unveiled the company. And then the next day at the show, we had our booth wrapped up, and then when the show started, we took the curtains down, and it was game on. So from there, you got to get product made, and we'll go take a look at that process. So this is virgin plastic. This is what goes into the molding machine to actually make the plastic bodies or parts. This is a molding machine. This is one of only 2 robots in the entire factory. And all this robot does is it's gonna come in, it's gonna pick up the part, take it over, and deposit that part in a bin box. Essentially, all it's doing is picking up underframes. All the other molding machines are ran by an operator. This gentleman's working on C39-8 bodies. You're gonna see he's gonna take a moment and look at the body, make sure there's not what's called a short shot. That's how you end up with regrind if the plastic doesn't flow. And so from there, it'll go to sub-assembly, and then it goes to paint. You'll see it's all hand painted with an automotive gun. We use a water-based paint. If you ever try to weather with an automotive gun, you know it's impossible. That's why we haven't done weathered models to date. It's all done by hand, set out to dry. There's just racks and racks of bodies drying. This is a neat, some of my favorite scenes. This is a giant metal rack, about yay big. And these strips that you see are masking tape, sticky side up. In this case, it's horns. It could be anything. And when someone's coming in, horn by horn, they lay them out one by one, all the way across. And it goes to paint. Have you ever got a body, and you look at the body and your detail parts, and they're a different color, and they should be the same color? I liken it to painting a house. You don't buy 2 gallons of paint and then go buy another gallon of paint in the same room because they're not gonna match. Same thing here. So at the very time they're painting bodies, they're gonna paint these horns or whatever other part. So this will go in, it'll be painted, come back out, go to a drying rack. As soon as it's dry, they'll take all these horns off, they'll take the masking tape off, they'll put fresh masking tape on, sticky side up, because now they gotta flip the horn over because it hasn't been painted yet, flip it over, send it back into paint, and paint the other side. And then the next scene might be a little hard to see, but can you guys tell me what this looks like when we get to it? Yeah, these right here. Right now, they're grab irons, okay?
Yeah.
So you see there's a long leg on the grab iron? There's literally a lady off camera here with a pair of tweezers, one by one, sticking those grab irons into that foam. There's thousands and thousands of grab irons. And what'll happen at the time we're painting those bodies, this will go into paint, and it'll get painted as well, and then when it comes out, that long leg gets snipped off, and there's just buckets of different grab irons with different colors that go for different projects at the factory. From paint, then it goes to masking. This is a paint mask. This is a Chessie SD40-2 getting the vermilion stripe. You'll notice how ugly this paint mask is around the edges, but the critical part's right there in the middle. And you'll see how he's sliding his fingers down to keep the pressure on the printing plate. That's so that there's no runs. You have those really perfectly straight edges. And when he takes it off, you'll actually see him take a moment to make sure the paint didn't run. If it did, that body's going to be scrapped. This is my absolute favorite scene. This is a DM&E Mount Rushmore SD40-2. And as it goes across, you'll see it's applying 5 colors to make Mount Rushmore come to life. Then it's going to go to another machine for the 4 colors that create the banner that goes across the Mount Rushmore logo. You see she's going to take it off, put another on the jig, and then she's going to grab a magnifying glass. Have you ever got a model and you're looking at the logo, the herald, it's multicolor, the printing, whatever it might be, and the edges are fuzzy? They're not lined up. Well, what she's doing then is, as she's looking through that magnifying glass, she's making sure that all 5 of those colors that just got printed are laying on top of each other perfectly. If they're not, that body's scrapped. They have to recalibrate the machine and start over. So from there, then think about this. That was 5 colors. Now they got to lay on these next 4 colors. All those 4 colors have to lay perfectly on the 5. Once again, if it doesn't, then that body's scrapped and they have to recalibrate and start over. So 9 colors just in that particular logo right there. This is final assembly. They wouldn't let us shoot much on the line, so we're going to have to use our imagination a little bit. But if you could imagine a table about yay wide, and it's probably 75 or 100 feet long, and there's like either locomotive bodies or there's car bodies all here, could be mechanisms, and here's a part, and a table, and a chair, and here's the long table, and then kitty corner from it's another chair and parts. And what happens is this person reaches over, takes the body, gets their part, puts it on at their station, sets it in the middle. This person is kitty corner, grabs that body, grabs their part, takes it to their station, puts their part on, puts it in the middle, and it goes that way, all the way down, back and forth down the line until it's finished. And then from there, mechanisms, every mechanism gets tested before it leaves the factory. And we're gonna listen we're gonna go through all the sound functions, all the lighting functions, but even more importantly, we're actually gonna shut the sound off, because as the locomotive runs, we're listening for any kind of gear train noise, any binding in the drivetrain, any problems with the motor, anything you might hear that's going on, so that can be fixed before it leaves the factory. And then it'll go to final packaging. That's when the mechanism and the locomotive body are married up. At final packaging, it gets labeled, it'll get an instruction manual, it'll get cleaned one last time. A lot of times if there's a problem in the process, they'll write like a grease pencil They want to get that cleaned off, there might be a fingerprint. We use vellum, that's what you see being wrapped around the body, that's so if the body shifts in transit, it doesn't scuff the paint. This is an actual shipment to us. The factory does not have a loading dock. There's actually a guy inside there with a pallet jack moving everything around. We do full containers nowadays. You'll see why in a little bit. This is a 20. We'll either do a 20 or a 40. And we'll go from either Yantian Port in China or Hong Kong through the Panama Canal over to Savannah, Georgia. And then we truck up from Savannah. And we'll show you what it looks like when it gets to our side of the pond. This is our very first shipment, came in January of 16. In those days, there was no money left, so the product sat straight on the floor. This is our son. One of the great things about those days is he didn't have to get paid. Today he wants paid. And then this will become important. You'll notice these are cardboard pallets. You'll see why that's important when we get to the next slide. So the second shipment we got was in March of 16, and Mike had come in from California, and he was going to do QA. And so we were going to splurge. He and I went, we bought pallets to place on the floor so we could put the product actually on the pallets. And this shipment left China as 5 pallets. And we get a phone call from Michelle. And she's like, you guys have to get here right now. And it's like, we're an hour away. What's going on? The shipment just came in. It's an absolute mess. I need your help. So we strap the pallets down and we go racing back to the office. And we walk in and it's enough to make you cry. She and the driver pretty much got everything taken care of by the time we got there. And you'll notice this box here is pretty damaged, that box is pretty damaged. What had happened was, in the early days, we couldn't afford full containers, we couldn't fill a full container. And so we'd ship less than container load. And when you do that, your orders get consolidated as it moves across the world. And we would do land bridge, so we'd come into Southern California, get consolidated, go on rail, come across the US, get consolidated again in Memphis or Atlanta, and then trucked up to us. Well, when it got to California, this is what we surmised happened. The forklift driver was really nice. He took those cardboard pallets and he set them in water. And you can imagine what happens to cardboard in water. So about yay high, he takes they've disintegrated, so he's got to put them on pallets. So about yay high, he takes all 5 skids and he skewers them. And he lets the product fall in the water. He was really kind though. He took them over and he set them on pallets, 2 of them. And he put the dry stuff on the pallets, and he says, well, I'll take this wet stuff and I'll put it on the dry stuff, and we'll shrink it, and we'll do that for 2 of the pallets. And then these last 3, heck with it, we'll just throw them in the truck, 53-foot trailer, and deliver it to him. And that's how the shipment came in. The guy at the time who was ordering had no clue what he was doing. We weren't taking pre-orders, and this fool ordered 9,000 rivet counter cars and 3,000 operator cars. And I can say that because I was the fool. I had no idea what I was doing. And so now we've got this mess that we've got to go through. And we decide that we'll start with the operator cars. There's only 3,000, and we'll play a game. And our church comes in that weekend to help us on Friday and Saturday. We play this game called Shake the Box. You pick up a box. If it rattles, put it in this pile. If it doesn't rattle, put it in this pile for inspection. And so we go through everything over the weekend, and we realize it's going to be a pretty big project. And as we start the real QA process, this actually is a blessing in disguise. We discovered something really bad. We didn't learn why for many, many months, but KD, right, their height gauge is the de facto standard, right? So if you want to make coupler heights right, you gotta have a KD gauge. So we sent the factory a factory sealed KD height gauge. Now, we didn't learn this for months, but what we found out months later was they somehow, when they went to assemble that KD height gauge, they put a McHenry coupler in it. And now all of our bolster heights are off by 10,000ths of an inch on all 12,000 cars. So on Monday evening, we send an email newsletter out, and we say, here's what's happening. Here, we got to fix all these cars, and we're going to do that. We're going to start with the operator. And it was amazing. On the next morning, I started getting phone calls from the local model railroad club, other modelers, and other folks who came in and wanted to help that week. So for about a week, we worked on all of the operator cars. We got them all fixed and got them built. Well, in that process, we sent a bunch of rivet counter cars to James Wright, and James calls me, and so he's going to, James Wright, JLWI 2000 on YouTube, he's going to do a review, and he calls me and he's like, Shane, these cars won't stay coupled. Well, this is the tank car, it's a unit train car, and rivet counter, we're doing 24 numbers plus a number, so people are going to run them on the trains. And I'm like, James, what are you talking about? And he explains to me what he's doing. And I said, all right, well, let me test this. Well, the operator cars are plastic couplers, rivet counter, hard die cast metal. And I set up this big loop because there was nothing in our office, big loop on the floor, and I start playing Thomas. And sure enough, if you go as fast as you can go, and then you stop, come to an absolute dead stop, a slack action happens, and the cars uncouple when you get about 10 or 12 cars. Doesn't matter what you do, they always uncouple. So now we've got an even bigger mess. So the very next week, it just so happens Mike and I are going to China, and we get a hold of the factory. We're like, you guys have to have a new coupler design when we get there, because we got to fix this mess. So we get over to China, and they have a new coupler waiting on us, and Mike and I start playing with this coupler. And it's really stiff. And after a little bit of time, it's silky smooth. I mean, the smoothest coupler you've ever felt in your life. And then the pin falls out. And you grab the next one, and the pin falls out. And the pin falls out. Well, they all fall out. So we send the designers back to the engineers back to the drawing board that night. They work through the night. Next morning, they have a new design for us. And the idea they've come up with is a conical shape and knurled or bumpy pin. So that way, as you open and close, it drives it in, and eventually it's just going to grab and it won't go any further. And that fixes it. So the factory makes 20,000 couplers, and I hand carry those back from China. We should get that through customs. That was a lot of fun. And when we get back, we have a lot of help lined up. We have modelers, we have our local train club, the church, tons of people lined up, and usually about a half a dozen people a day. So Mike, Joe, and Paul are in from California. You know, we've got Michelle and our kids helping, and we have 2 weeks worth of help set up, about a half a dozen extra people a day, and we work for that 2 weeks. And at the end of the 2 weeks, we have about 1,500 cars left when all the help is done. And so we have, we still got to finish this project. So that Monday, Mike and Joe and Paul and I are working on cars. Michelle's running stuff back and forth. And it was miserable. We worked about 18 to 20 hours a day for the previous, 2 weeks, and worn out. And so that Monday night, I got a phone call from the local model railroad club, and his name was Mark. Mark says, "Shane, how's it going?" I'm like, "Mark, we're dying. We got like 100 cars done today. We're probably 2 weeks away from finishing this beast. I don't know how we're going to do it." And he says, "Let me see what we can do, and I'll call you back." Calls me back about an hour later, says, "I'll be up in the morning with some help." Shows up about 8 o'clock in the morning with a dozen people. I mean, it was a godsend. And we start working, work through lunch, bring in lunch, work through dinner, bring in dinner. And mid-evening, it's like, all right, you guys have worked all day. We've got about 300 or so cars left. You got an hour drive, you got families, you got to work tomorrow, go home. You've done as much as we can ask you to do. And they're like, "No, we're staying until we're done." I was like, "We can't ask you to do that." I'm like, "You're not asking, and we're staying." So we got to work, and we finished up probably about 1:30 in the morning. And I tell this story because this is one of the reasons that clubs are so important to us. And we didn't tell these guys at the time, but they made a huge difference. So if you've ever owned a business, you know that credit card deposits take 2 days. And by them staying until 1:30 in the morning on Wednesday morning, that allowed us to bill the rivet counter pre-orders that Wednesday morning, which meant the deposits hit our bank on that Friday. Well, that Friday was payroll, and if they hadn't stayed, we wouldn't have made payroll, and we'd have been out of business. That's how close we came to not making it. So that's one of the reasons for the road trip, is to say thank you to clubs like yourselves for what you do for our hobby and our industry. It's very much appreciated. So from there, we'll share some happy stories, and we'll look at a couple of things. We like to have a lot of fun whenever we can. We get out and shoot stuff in Kansas City. We shot that Dash 9 with that's in H1 with H2 door. You just never know when you're going to find something really cool like that. And then some other things. This is we're going to close the road trip with this. A couple of years ago, we did a river rail excursion. There's a railroad real close to us that goes out in the mountains that loops back around itself. And we brought in like Pele Soberg Cable from Denmark. We had a bunch of special guests. James Wright was there. We had 240 people from 25 states and 4 countries join us. And we're going to close the road trip by doing this again. So if you'd love to vacation with us in Tennessee and meet a lot of folks, we'd love to have you at the end of the road trip. And then we were in Ravenna when 2716 returned. We showed this slide because that's what started our relationship really closely with CSX that leads us to the next piece. So CSX was working on the Pride and Service project when Ravenna came, 2716 we came back to Ravenna, and we got to meet the really key people in that project. And we talked to them about recreating those locomotives. We were actually working on the ES44s at that time, and they were like, "Well, yeah, we'll do that, but here's what we want in return." And they said, "We'll give you the paint lettering diagrams, all the paint codes, access to the locomotives. Well, we're going to ask you to do, there's 5 charities on the locomotives, and they benefit veterans, police, and first responders and their families. We're going to ask you to make a donation back to those organizations." And we're like, "No problem." So we were really blessed. If you've purchased, and I saw one out on the railroad, If you purchased any or all of the Pride and Service locomotives, we want to give you the heartiest thank you. You made a huge difference in people's lives. We were able to donate $7,000 each to the 5 charities for a total of $35,000. So thank you for making a difference. Some other things, we were there, thank you. Hey, you guys deserve the applause, you made it happen. We had a chance to chase the big boy last year, and we learned that the MTH big boy that we have is nowhere close to accurate to 2014. So we're going to Cheyenne later this year, and we'll make the most accurate 4014 to date, including with the PTC and antenna box in the cab. And then the road trip has really mushroomed into something way bigger than we ever expected it to be. We thought by the end of next year we'd be done. I think we're actually going to go into 24. We're going to have a lot of dates. We'll actually do our 50th. This is our 49th meet and greet since the road trip started on Labor Day last year. So become a really big deal for us. And then some other things about the present and the future. Up on the table, you'll see these. A little over a week ago at the National Trade Show, we announced our first MTH projects. We acquired the MTH HO&S tooling at the end of 2020. Our first 5 are going to be in the Kit Classics line, and they're steam air. So these will be our first steam air freight cars. The great part is the hopper is going to be the most expensive at $21.99, but it does include the loads. All the others will be under $20, and the other announcements will be coming over the next few months. And then we've got our first S-scale samples. There's one here on the table. We've got a boxcar, a reefer, and a wide vision caboose. And then probably the big question is about MTH locomotives. Steam locomotives are the high priority. We are having ESU design all the electronics for us. We're putting in our motors. ESU is designing the motherboards, the smoke systems, and of course we'll put ESU Lope 75 decoders. Our first announcement, fingers and toes are crossed. I don't know if we're going to make it, but we hope to announce the Norfolk and Western J and the matching passenger cars at TrainFest this November. And then the goal would be to have a new locomotive about every 60 to 90 days. So the Burke will be the second, and then not too far behind that, we'll see the Challenger, we'll see the GS4, the Daylight, and on and on and on. So we'll cycle through all of those. And then last month, we acquired Fox Valley Models, and with both HO and N. If you're an N-scale, the big news here is we're adding DCC and sound for the first time. It'll be also the ESU Lope Sound 5. And Fox Valley used to put all the detail parts in the box. Now they'll be factory painted and factory applied. So no work to do, just take it out of the box and run it. And then from there, a couple things about the present and the future. We've been really blessed. We've grown from the original 4 to 19 team members in 5 states. We're regularly receiving new product shipments. That's been huge for us. That's really helped our cash flow. And we are investing a ton in all new HO&N projects. To kind of give you an idea, outside of the MTH acquisition, outside of the Fox Valley acquisition, right now we're investing about $1 million a year in brand new tooling. So there is a ton of new product in the pipeline. And then we're really going to be working on some customer-focused services coming soon, and there'll be something that's special for clubs we're really excited to roll out, hopefully by the end of the year. And then something for us that we are looking forward to, we are absolutely on top of each other in our 2,700 square foot office and warehouse. So when we get back, we'll be moving into a new facility in Cleveland, Tennessee, about 30 minutes. This is the new building, and it's in an area where we can attract a lot more talent. We're in a pretty rural spot, so it's hard to get and keep new talent where we are, and we'll have some more as well. So a lot of great things happening in the future. And with that, I'll open it up to Q&A. It just takes one. Mr. Jones is going to kick us off with the big bullshit.
Okay, you're starting to get into steam, which is good.
Yep.
But all the engines you mentioned are fairly modern, large locomotives. For us guys who model early steam, that slide valve prior to 1927, are you planning on doing some slide valve locomotives?
I doubt we'll see anything that early in the near future. The challenge there is, unless you're doing the USRA series, there's not a lot of commonality between railroads, and steam locomotives are some of the most expensive locomotives to create, so the financial risk is really high.
Yeah, see, that's why I'm modeling pre-USRA to avoid that commonality.
Yeah, and unfortunately, your best bet is probably going to be brass, just because the cost of the risk is so high, unfortunately.
Yeah.
It's a business, and I hate to say it, that we have to look at.
Question over here.
Yes,
I'll come up here real quick.
how you doing? Thanks for coming.
So, sort of on the topic of doing steam locomotives,
Jay or Heisler or Clements.
Any comments?
Nothing in the short term. Something to discuss, but right now, for us on the steam side of the house, we want to get the MTH projects back on the market so we can recover that investment. And we have started our own project. We started that actually before MTH. And now that we're getting the MTH stuff kind of in the pipeline, we're getting back to that project. But we're still a few years off from having our own, but we'll get there. Something we've talked about. Yeah. Something we definitely talked about.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for the tunnel movers.
Oh, you're
Thank
welcome.
you.
That's all Paul. I gotta give you credit.
Now my question is, what's the difference between the museum and the rivet counters?
Okay.
Any examples of those up there?
Yeah, there's a museum quality turbine here and a museum quality SDL 39. It's interesting, that's a good question. So in the beginning, the idea was we bring all the tech into the museum quality line, but then the market responded to us and we had to bring the tech into the rivet counter line. So what you're gonna see now is what the tagline is legendary locomotives. And so the turbine's definitely one for UP, the SDL 39 is for Milwaukee. You'll see us doing more unique projects that are specialty locomotives. And that because of that, they'll carry a little bit higher price tag because the unit sales are not nearly as big. Only, at this point, the only main differentiators are gonna be, the curve squeal, the frog clang, a little bit more lighting, not much. I think we're coming to the point where people can demand the same lighting features in rivet counter as we're providing in museum quality. So it's getting harder and harder as the market demands more and more features to really differentiate the two from a feature set. Yes, sir.
Any covered wagons, E's, F's,
Uh,
EL9, 109s?
Rapido has announced E's, and we'll let them do that. F units, the Highliner's F that Athearn does, there's really no room to improve on that. It's a great model.
Yeah.
So I don't see us there, but we will have something in that transition area, the not too distant future. I'll go here and then over here and there.
All right, so with your museum quality models, with their museum quality, that means they are extremely highly detailed to the best of your abilities.
Actually, no more than rivet counter, not much more than rivet counter.
Oh, really?
Mhm.
Okay, well, with them still being highly detailed, does that, naturally that makes them more fragile, but have you guys, how durable have you been able to make your models with the amount of detail they have?
There's durable as they can be with the level of detail. The good news is with the handrails, with the Cellcon, you can grab them and they're not gonna break. Early Cellcon would have broke. You can form them back into position after being handled. One thing we do though, is it's kind of if you've ever got, let's take the metal parts, especially like grills. If you've ever had one pop off, there's a reason for that. As they're shipped, they can get hot and cold, and that expands and contracts metal. What we tell our factories is to put as little glue on it as possible, because that way, as it expands and contracts, it'll pop off, but you can put it back on. If we had it so it was really stuck, there'd be so much glue that it would ooze through the detail, and then of course the body's ruined, it wouldn't look right. So we err on the side of we'd rather have to put it back on and not mess up the model than to put too much glue on, or the same thing happens with detail parts. So parts are actually glued from the inside. I don't know if you know that or not. They're not glued from the outside. You glue them from the back. But in that same vein, you're cautious on how much you use, because if you put too much glue, it will ooze up out of that hole. And once again, you ruin the body and it's scrap. So there's a fine line there, but we err on too little glue, honestly, because it's easier to put a part back on than it is to toss a body in the garbage. Yes, sir.
Will you support the MTHs if we have problems?
Boy, we get that question a lot.
Well, we like them.
Yeah, I think what you'll see from us, we'll be able to do some repair. And then the other thing that we're talking seriously about, but we don't have an answer yet until we get the first project done. I think what you'll see from us is an electronic upgrade kit where you could buy our electronics and put inside of it.
44 outside.
Okay, does that include the motor and all the?
Yeah, we would probably do it with motor, motherboard.
What are we looking at? Just, shoot
I
up in the air.
have
Because
no.
I'm trying to figure out the way you're talking, it'd be cheaper to buy one
We'll get the upgrade kit.
We haven't got that far yet. We've gotta get through getting the first model done
Okay.
and where we want it, and then we'll be looking at that and what the
Fair
cost
enough.
would be. Yeah. But
Thank
we'll
you.
get- And we'll even offer, I see us offering even the installation service for a fee if you want us, if you want to see the model to us and actually have us do it. Yes, sir.
You mentioned Athens earlier.
Huh?
What did you take from them?
What do we take from them?
They said
My
nothing.
question is, I got an Athens Genesis big boy.
Huh?
I would like the engine completely gone through. Do you do that?
No, not for Atherton product, just for our product. Yeah.
That's all I need.
Okay, I'll go here and then back here.
Do you do any undecorated stuff? Because I do Northern Pacific.
Mhm.
I know you don't have any.
We're getting there with the beat. Undecorated is the thing that nightmares are made of.
Yeah.
For freight cars, we continue to do freight cars. We're gonna stop doing locomotives, but I'll ask a question before I say we're gonna stop fully. The challenge is, and take this run of GP30s right here. Just in front of me, there are 5 different versions. I think there's 6, plus you got different sound, lighting files, all of that. That means each one of these has to have their own unique version. Couple things happen. We sell less than 24 of each version. We've done it usually just 12, and then we get cancellations for pre-orders. And not only that, but the factory cannot pick these correctly to save their life. We have a guy who not lying, he'll order 24 and decorated. We had something the other day, he ordered of this one project, there were 1,500 parts missing or wrong that the factory could not pick. They're designed to make finished goods. So that'll lead me to another question. If we had the factory fully assemble a model but leave it undecorated, would you still be interested? Because they could do that, but they're not gonna be able to give it to you as a kid. I don't know if folks would be interested in that or not. Now, we can do it in freight cars, that's no problem. Locomotives was a challenge. Yep, there's right there. Don't step on it. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Shane, I know the economics are in favor of doing models that can be, decorated and detailed for many railroads.
Mhm.
However, your very first project was unique to a single railroad.
Mhm.
I'd like to propose, or ask if there's any consideration being given to DD35s.
It's a project we'd like to do, A's and B's. Yeah.
Okay, I will buy a lot of them.
The thing about the big blow, coming from Atherton, we knew with the Challenger, the big boy, the FEF, the U50, this was one we always wanted to do there. And it was really expensive. It was the most expensive project ever proposed at Atherton. And, it was started at one time, but then for reasons I won't get into, got canceled, and we could never get it revived. But we knew that this locomotive not only has a US following, it has a global following. And that's why it was that flag planting. Plus, we wanted to show what we could do and really, I don't want to say show off, but show where we could.
Thank you.
Technology, I guess that's how I should say it. Other questions from the group?
So are you guys gonna be doing museum quality models such as like other companies haven't done before or done very well, such as Camelbacks or other locomotives? Or
How do I answer that question? I can tell you there's some very unique museum quality projects in the works right now.
okay.
To be announced, the first will be announced within the next year and a half. I'll go here and back here.
Are you gonna be doing any electric locomotives? I know both Milwaukee and Great Northern, primarily Milwaukee, but also Great Northern had electric operations out in the west.
So with MTH, we got the Little Joe and we got the bipolar, and they'll both come back at some point. And then we've gotten this question a lot on this trip, and I think it's a question that we'll revisit again. Back in the back here.
Are you guys gonna do the models of the SD70 ACE?
We have the 70 Ace from Fox Valley. We also have the 70 Ace from MTH. Something we've seriously discussed bringing to Rivet Counter as well, but no firm plans at the moment.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
What's your opinion on the new coreless motors, and do you think they'll be able to overtake more conventional 5-pole motors?
We've looked at cordless. Cordless definitely has advantages, especially on the maintenance side of the house. One of our challenges is we need an electronics engineer on staff to be able to test a lot of the concepts that we're wanting to come to the market with, but we just don't have that yet. So for us, we're relying fully on ESU from the electronics side, and there's limitations to what you can get done when you're using an outside resource.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
How about maintenance of weight?
MOW, we get that question a lot. MOW is tough because it's so unique. And it's one, you might buy one, you know, and that one's hard. Just because, once again, it's the investment, right? And I'll give you guys an idea, just a ballpark. A super detailed locomotive, you're looking at $250,000 plus, just for the tooling. For a freight car, you're looking at $100,000 for a freight car with multiple variations. And when we talk about some of these unique things, we might sell 1,000 pieces. Well, if you got on a maintenance of way self-propelled, probably $150,000. You sold 1,000, $150 of that is just, you know, recovering your tooling costs, not including your research, your unit cost, your profit. It makes those things hard to recover your investment. That's the tough part.
Do you guys have any interest in doing models from like smaller scenic roads in the U.S.?
I'll flip that question around to you guys as an audience. So one of the challenges is, as you get into railroad road number era specific detail, right, you really kind of back yourself into a corner. And I'm going to use the Wisconsin Southern 40th Anniversary SD40-2 as an example. Awesome locomotive, beautiful paint scheme, think we'd sell a ton. If we brought it rivet counter, though, it's going to be wrong. A couple of details that changed. So on a 40-2, the sand hatch is on the top. They cut it off, ground it perfectly flat, can't tell it was ever there. Came down to the center of the rear end of the long hood, cut a notch in and put the sand fill in. Well, to do that on a model, it's about $10,000 investment. Yeah, so no way are we going to be able to do that. Plus their ditch lights, they just went and got like not angle iron, but tread plate essentially, and bent it in half and put the ditch lights on it. There's no way to light that, and there's no way to make that corrugated look to it. So there's going to be things we could probably get it 95% of the way there, but not 100. Would you buy a model and the problem is when we get to short lines, they evolve a lot. And getting all of those minute, unique details, there's no way we can. So would you buy a model that was 95% of the way there?
Depends on the price.
Price is gonna be the same as what a rivet counter model is, and it doesn't change anything.
I'd buy it because I'm not super finicky, like this bit of chain is in the wrong place. I'm not that kind of person. So
Okay.
if it looks good, I'm fine with that.
I don't
I bought
count
a few
rivets.
rivets, you know, and everything, and I dropped it on its tip. The guys kind of helped me a little bit, but they put the yellow lights, operating the safety light on top is not functioning.
Send it to us.
Uh,
Send it to us. We'll take care of it.
Okay.
And I'll give you guys just a little, I don't know, call it advice. When something like that happens, just tell us. Because what you'll find is more often than not, if you're upfront and honest with us, we'll just fix it at no charge. Then we've had people trying to pull the wool over us, and we've seen enough that.
Aha, Bill.
Yeah, just tell us and
Good, I'll send the SD45 to you then.
Yeah.
Repair.
yeah, just send us a note, tell us what happened. More often than not, we
Put it on its back end.
we fix stuff like that all the time.
I'm gonna give you kudos. You guys are aware, we got the 844, right? I got the tender off. Dave will remember, we were back here fighting the battle of the coupler not lining up. We finally took the photographs, sent them to them, they said, send it to us, send it back. They sent me a whole nother unit after they saw the matchup. That,
Oh,
yeah,
really?
it wasn't lined up, yeah.
We stand behind what
They
do.
back up what they put out there.
We'll
I
be
know that for a fact.
We'll be the first to admit we're not perfect. God didn't make us that way. So when we make a mistake, we take care of it.
And I do have two of the SD38-2s
Oh.
from MTH.
Okay?
I mean, there was a thing, I was out really sick for a while, but, you guys, they take a lot to get these modified or whatever we need to do to get them to track with each other, you know, stuff like that, so. Like you said, are you gonna open up, I mean, have repairs on those?
Too early to say. I'm honestly, I'm worried about it. We get this question just about at every stop, and I'm afraid that we won't have a service department big enough to handle it. I gotta be honest. We'll service what's bought from us first, because that's, all we bought from MTH was the tooling. We didn't buy parts, we didn't buy their name, we didn't buy, we just got the tooling.
Right.
Will we make stuff available? Yes, but I'm hedging my bet because I wanna make sure that we have enough to service the people who buy from us and not, because when you make a production run, like take the J, we might not do another production run for 12 months or 24 months. We don't wanna be out of parts to repair the thing for somebody who's bought something from us. So we'll work with you, and the best thing to do is talk to service once we can start shipping product. And what it'll be is, at the time we run that particular model, whatever model you have, that's when we'll have the parts, that's when we'll be able to work on that model. But until we get there, it's not like we're gonna go through and run everything. We've acquired, just to give an idea, we acquired over 800 tools in HO&S from MTH. That is a monster number. The average project might only have, a locomotive might have 10 or 15 tools, so 800 tools is a lot of tools. I'll go here and here, and then
What, I don't wanna push up against the wall, but when do you plan on
I don't know.
working the upgrade for the
I don't know.
MTHs?
I don't know.
A year?
Probably gonna have to
It could be a few months, it could be a year, I really.
And you'll get it out
Long
Yeah.
after.
to,
I wanna say, some of us have a timeline here.
Mom got it outside.
and you get it out by way of,
Well, I would encourage you, if you're not already, sign up for our email newsletter. We put your name in the hat, we'll add you to the newsletter, for the giveaways. Like us on Facebook if you use social, we'll put the word out.
okay,
But we just need time. We've invested a ton of money in buying the MTH product, and right now our focus is getting that return on investment so that we can do things like this project, where we can spend the time and the resources to see if we can come up with a retrofit. And honestly, I think we're gonna have to hire some more people in our product support team. Well, that takes money, right? And so we gotta, it's the finished goods that make us the money. Yes, sir.
So if I bought, like, say, a freight car from you guys and it arrived broken, and I just decided to try and fix it on my own, would you still take it back to repair it?
It'd be a case by case, and you just need to visit the product support. That's the best thing to do.
Okay.
All right, we're getting into a lot of what-if questions, and most of those I can't answer, but go
I
ahead.
don't know if it's been identified to you before by other people or other consumers. All of your freight cars, a majority of them, the scale size couplers, plastic, have you had any complaints or grief come out about those ones? I find in my collection, a number of them don't like to stay coupled. The couplers jam open and won't operate, and they
So
don't
these are on
pull
the
a good
operator
load.
cars?
Pardon me?
These are on operator cars?
Mostly the operator, and then the next version of them, I think.
So Kid Classics and operator of plastic, Rivet Counter Museum, Fall Here Die Cast,
It'd be the kit and then the next one.
that'd be kit and operator. In the early days, but that coupler's gone through some iterations, so you shouldn't be experiencing any problems unless you're running really long trains, much more than 15 or 20 cars. I've ran as many 50 cars with operator couplers and not had any problems with them. And then the Rivet Counter Die Cast, and that, we're probably on the 5th iteration of that coupler, and feel like we've got it dialed in now. Some of the early days we had a problem. If you're having issues, once again, contact product support, we'll send you a couple, it's no problem. All right, so what we'll do is we're gonna wrap up. Michelle and I will hang around, and answer any questions that you might have. Make sure if you're, not a member of a club, you get a chance to see all the layouts, visit with the club members. I'm sure they would love to have some new members as well. And if you haven't had an opportunity, we'll get the box out, and be able to sign up for some hats and shirts and koozies. Make sure you get gift bags. We got more under the table. They have this exclusive road trip pin you can only get in the bag. Also in the bag are some gifts from us. There's some pens and there's an HO brochure. There's N-scale brochures back on that table. We've got scale trains pins. Don't turn them upside down, fall out on you. There's scale trains pins and ribbon counter pins right here. And then all the models on the table, you're welcome to pick up and take a closer look. They've all been loved on, you can't hurt them. And so we want to say thanks to the club for hosting tonight. I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to wish you all the best and say God bless. Have a great night. Did they wake you up here?
No. A lot of it is
I'm probably not gonna.
Yeah.
I'm gonna ask you to hold it down here because that dynamic breaks.
Oh, okay. Oh, not sure, that's where that's on access to the
And of course, the matching D unit.
Yeah. Looks beautiful. Can't wait. I got 4 of these and 4 of those on order.
Awesome. Well, they're gonna ship to us in mid-December, so it should be late in January.